Brilliant. Good morning. My name is Lee today. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm chair of the Acute Hospitals NHS Trust. I'd like to welcome board colleagues and guests to this meeting of the Trust Board in public on Thursday the 13th of July. I'd also like to welcome anyone who may be joining us via YouTube. As I'm sure everyone is aware, today marks the start of the latest round of junior doctors' strikes, which are scheduled to last for the next 5 days. We'll try and keep today's board as normal as possible, but in your indulgence, please, that we may have to change things. We may have to take board papers as read. We may have to slightly restrict discussion, and indeed executive colleagues may need to leave the meeting at various times to attend various catch-up calls and meetings. But we will try and keep things as normal as possible within those constraints. As board colleagues will know, it's always been my custom to start board meetings by referencing our strategic pyramid. Given that the Trust stands at the point of the next stage of its journey to becoming an outstanding trust, and given that this is my last board, I thought, well, I might as well carry on as I've started. So I'd like to remind us all around the table of what it is we believe in, what it is our commitment is to our staff and patients. We believe in putting patients first. That is our purpose. That's underpinned by our vision of working in partnership to provide the best healthcare for our communities and leading and supporting our teams to move forward. That vision becomes a reality by delivering our strategic objectives: best services for local people, best experience of care and outcomes for patients, best use of resources, and best people. And we need to work together with colleagues within the Trust and across the Trust and with our system partners in ways which positively model our forward behaviours to meet the priorities set out in our clinical services strategy and our enabling strategies. And we are doing this. We're doing it using our forward improvement system, built on respect for the commitment and expertise of our teams, recognising that the best people that can tell us how to do things are the people that do that job on a day-to-day basis, and a mindset of continuous improvement that better never stops. But also, given the most pressing challenges that we face, also recognising that we need to be flexible and adaptive, and particularly with a focus on pace to address some of those most pressing challenges. Our forward improvement system intentionally and deliberately puts our patients at the heart of what we do, how our services are planned, developed, delivered, and evaluated. We believe in this trust in putting patients first, and that means giving them a voice. Under normal circumstances, we would normally like to have a patient with us today to give us a story. Unfortunately, our patient that we had got lined up had to withdraw at the last minute, and given the circumstances, we weren't able to find a replacement at short notice. But I very much hope that those commitments that we have made as a board, whatever the future holds, that I'm sure that commitment, those promises will continue. Let's move on then to our meeting.
Can I just say a couple of words?
Please, Simon.
We all have our opportunities to have chats with you, and thank you personally for everything you've done for this trust over many years on other occasions. But I thought it was appropriate that at this moment, we ought to just thank you for this board for everything you have done. When you arrived, this trust was in very, very challenging circumstances, and I'm not underestimating the challenges that still face us. But there's been considerable progress made, and a lot of that is down to you and the way you conducted yourself as a non-exec director, as deputy chair, and as interim acting chair here. So, on behalf of the board, Thank you for everything you've done. We wish you well in all your future endeavours. There must be something else for you to do in the NHS. I'm absolutely sure of that. But as I say, we'll all catch up with you personally in due course to say thank you in our own way.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Right, moving on. Apologies for absence. We have apologies from Susan Clare, from Vicky Lewis, but we have Rebecca Brown deputising, Matthew Hopkins, we have Christine Blanchard deputising, and we also have apologies from Michelle Lynch. I'd also like to welcome Sarah Shingler and Helen Lancaster to their first formal board meetings. Items of any other business, I've not been notified of any. Does anyone want to raise anything at this point? No? Okay. Declarations of interest. Tony?
Yes, thanks, Chair. I just want to confirm that I'm now going to become the trust nominee on the Charles Hastings Education Centre charity and its subsidiaries, replacing Simon Murphy. The trust has a business relationship with the charity, therefore I'll be putting on my declaration of interest. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
One from me also today, Anita. My wife is the manager of the Adult Safeguarding Board in Worcestershire, and seeing as we've got our safeguarding report coming up, I thought it appropriate just to mention that.
Thank you very much for both of those. Our normal declarations are, of course, on the website. Moving on then, the minutes of the last meeting. They're in your pack. Could I have an agreement or comment as well if there are any amendments that are needed, or confirmation that we're happy that that's a full record of that meeting? Does anyone have anything that they would like to change? Okay, brilliant. So I can take those as the true record. Thank you very much. Action log. Rebecca.
Yes, thank you, Chair. The updated sales per the log, as you'll be aware, we'll be going through a process of reviewing and updating the board development plan, of which this item will be included. Thank you.
Any comments on that? No? Okay, then let's move on then to the chair's report. I haven't had to take any chair's actions or anything like that. Clearly, what I would like to do is talk about the industrial action that I mentioned at the top. And I have a statement here that just make sure I get it all in. I'm going to read from some of this. As we know, today is day one of this strike, and we've had industrial action before, but the length of this industrial action for 5 days, combined with the fact that it's over a weekend, and as we know anyway, we don't have as much cover, and indeed the fact that it's taking place immediately before the 2-day consultant strike, means that this industrial action is proving to be significantly more challenging for us to plan medical cover than for previous strikes. And we have to concede that we are going into this period anticipating that our services will be significantly impacted. We are working very closely with our partners across health and social care and making every possible effort to prioritise our resources to protect emergency treatment, critical care, neonatal care and trauma, and to ensure we prioritise patients who've waited the longest for elective and cancer surgery. But there's no doubt that as a trust, we are extremely concerned that the impact of this industrial action may well compromise those objectives. Please let's not forget that our teams have had to manage the impact of industrial action over several months now. Each walkout has required our colleagues to step up, to make extraordinary efforts to keep key services running safely. They've given up their annual leave. They've taken on unfamiliar roles, some acting up, some acting down, worked in new ways, and put in hours of additional time. And that's all on top of what would ordinarily be an extremely demanding day job. And I'd like, on behalf of the board, to give our thanks to all our colleagues who are doing exactly those things to try and keep our patients safe. Depending on how the next few days pan out, we do recognise that this organisation may be faced with some very difficult decisions. in order to keep the services running as safely as possible for local residents. All of us sincerely hope it's not going to come to that, but we may need to make decisions at short notice. And what I'd like to assure all colleagues is that we as a board recognise the situation, recognise the challenges, and we will be unified in our support for any action that may need to be taken. My message to patients is this: those patients who have appointments, please continue to come forward unless you've been notified that they've been postponed. But we are strongly advising our local population to help us. Choose wisely, only visit our emergency departments if they are seriously sick. Our emergency department teams will be working exceptionally hard, prioritising patients with life or limb-threatening injuries and illness, to try and focus on life-saving care for those patients in the greatest need. Patients whose conditions are less serious may be asked to seek treatment elsewhere or face an extremely long wait. Please remember NHS 111. It's available online or by calling them on the phone for any urgent but not life-threatening medical needs. Their trained advisors will direct people to the best possible care, be it an out-of-hours GP appointment or an appointment time to attend A&E or a minor injury. As all colleagues will know, I, together with our Deputy Chief Executives, wrote to all our local MPs yesterday, urging them to do all they can to ensure that the Secretary of State for Health and Social Care understands the severity of the situation that patients will now find themselves in, and engages in good faith in urgent negotiations so that further strike action can be averted and we can provide our local population with the care that they rightly deserve. That's my report for today. I'd like it noted. Thank you. Right, moving on then. Chief Executive, sorry, comment.
Just one comment would be, I think for the record, we need to thank our system partners. They have been extremely proactive in terms of supporting us. I'm sure Helena's Chief Nursing Officer and Chief Medical Officer would back up what I'm saying. They have been always supportive of us.
That's great. Thank you for getting that note on the record. Thank you. Right, moving on then. Chief Executive's report. Christine.
Thank you, Chair. I'd also like to start with the industrial action. So an update as of today is that both our acute sites are safe. We've had senior clinical and management staff walking the floors, speaking to the staff who have reported for duty. The vast majority of our trainees who are members of the BMA have elected to take industrial action, and their work has been covered by a variety of other practitioners, advanced care practitioners, advanced nurse practitioners, pharmacists, therapists, and our consultants acting down. And we're extremely grateful to those staff who have stepped in to support. We will be keeping the situation closely under review on a shift-by-shift basis. We have got senior management and operational cover on both of our acute sites, and with each shift change we'll be ensuring that we still have safe staffing levels. Although there is no national derogation to preserve acute and emergency and critical care services in terms of junior doctor staffing, there is an agreement negotiated with the BMA that should a patient safety incident arise, we will be able to ask for permission to recall specific doctors that are required to manage that incident, and we have the contact details for those doctors should we need to call them in. It's the beginning of what is going to be a long haul for us, and I'd really like to echo Matt's comments about the support that we've had for our system partners. has been very welcome indeed. And in addition, I'd like to put on record my thanks to the management and the operational teams who have worked so hard to ensure that our services are kept as safe as they can be during this industrial action. So thank you to everyone who has worked and will continue to work extremely hard over the next few days. In other news, we were pleased to host a visit to the Alexandra Hospital by two of our local MPs, Rachel McLean and Sajid Javid. Rachel, I think, is coming back again next Friday to talk about maternity services as well. On this visit, they visited the Garden Suite, and if any of you have been there since it relocated to its new location, you'll agree that it is a beautiful therapeutic setting for patients to receive chemotherapy treatment, and the staff there are exceptionally caring, and that was noted on the visit. We have also, as you will note from our written report, we have received confirmation from the other members of the foundation group that their boards have supported our application for full membership. So we are proceeding with our plans to transition into full membership of the foundation group from the 1st of August, at which point, all being well, Glenn Burley will become our Chief Executive and Russell Hardy will become our Chair. So it will be a change at the top, but I think for our patients and for our staff, they will be pleased to see that we'll continue on the same strategic direction that we have been following for the last few years, and we will be continuing to put our patients first. Earlier in this month, I was extremely pleased to be part of our 4th Leading Forward event. These are events that we put on for our middle and senior leadership within the organisation, both clinical and non-clinical, to talk about our forward improvement system, to provide some training and some induction in the forward improvement system and explain how their contribution can help to improve services for our patients and really cements the importance of the people who are doing the work, working to improve the work as part of their routine daily work. We heard from colleagues that were already using the forward improvement system to make improvements for patient care, to eliminate waste and improve efficiency. And it was a very well received event. We received excellent feedback from the participants, and it was really great for me to hear some of the stories from our staff there. The more that we can share and spread that across the organisation, the more we will continue to improve our services for our patients.
Thank you. Any questions or comments for Christine?
Could I just add to Christine's comments about the Forward event, which I was present at? We had a fantastic presentation by a housekeeper. I think Ward 11 at the Alex. Karen and Tony are nodding there because they were there too. This is somebody who's taken an initiative to, I think, effectively reboot the signage that was in that ward, which has given a lot more clarity to staff and to patients there and to families. I think there has been a drop in falls notified in that ward. But the important thing is that's now going to be rolled out across the whole of the Alex and then across the whole of the trust in due course. So it does show that the forward improvement system works. Somebody comes up with a good idea who's doing the job, sees what can be done to improve the situation, and it will save us some money. Not vast amounts, but it will save us some money. So it's an excellent example, and I've been in touch with asking to keep me in the loop on how it's going. So it was a really good presentation, I thought.
Yeah, I think there are some wonderful stories going on. I was at the Alex yesterday and I was talking to a couple of nurses, one I can't remember which area she was in, but she was saying she's using the forward methodology to sort out where should the key to the drugs cabinet be. And it's something as minor as that, but what they've worked out is it saves them 4 minutes every time they have to go and get drugs because they're not wandering around trying to find it. Julie, you wanted to come?
In this day and age, we should not be having mechanical keys. This should be part
They probably should.
IT system.
Probably should, but they estimate they're saving between 4 and 6 minutes every time they have to get drugs by knowing where it is. And they're also in outpatients doing some work using the methodology about trying to work out, are they actually using all the outpatient consulting rooms all the time? Is there inefficiency there? Can we improve productivity by using space that's not being used? So there are stories everywhere you go around the trust about the benefits that are being felt, so, and the enthusiasm of our colleagues in actually going forward with this is very well, it's very heartening to see. So yeah, thank you for that. If there are no further comments on Christine, Julie.
I don't think everybody knows. I want to go back to the strikes. I find it absolutely incredible that we are facing the biggest industrial action that is in my memory, and I've been here around, and yet there is so little cover and there is so little alarm out there. This is, I think, a major national crisis. It's not a Worcestershire crisis. It's not a local thing. This is a national crisis. We are facing 7 consecutive days without full medical staffing, and I find it unbelievable there is not more outcry about this, because I think it is absolutely appalling. And I'm not saying appalling, but the situation is appalling that we are in.
I completely agree. I have to say, I looked at the papers this morning and wanted something. There's very little there indeed, or on Radio 4, very little actually.
There should be far more outcry about it, and there should be far more urgent action to try and resolve it.
Yeah. Any more questions or comments for Christine? No, thank you. Let's move on then. Annual plan, Jo, I think.
Thank you, Chair. So bring to the public board the annual plan that was approved in May. It's for us to note, and you'll see from the paper that it has been well referred and discussed as a board in other settings. But given that we are in public, I just wanted to remind ourselves that the approach we took to annual planning this year was very much about putting patient safety first in our approach. We have identified 3 key priorities which are consistent with the national guidance as part of year 2 of our 3-year plan, and those are around achieving patient flow, restoring elective recovery, and achieving financial sustainability. You'll see in the plan that a lot of effort has been made. We were asked to resubmit the plan as every ICS and every trust in the country was asked to do earlier in the year. We were able to deliver a balanced plan, but you will note on page 3, in order to achieve that, we had to accept delivery of a further 8 million of PEP, giving us a total of 28 million, which is 4.2%, which is ambitious. So in order to achieve that, we've stood up some detailed resource from some of our senior managers to provide some weekly stand-up as part of a transformation delivery group, so that we can make sure we have the assurance and oversight of that work. So the paper is to note, Chair, but I just want to draw attention to the board in terms of we understand the risks and the ambition, and I'm sure in terms of progress and delivery that will get picked up later in the agenda as part of the integrated performance report.
Thank you, Jo. Any questions or comments for Jo?
Just a comment, if I may. I know when we talk about reviewing our priorities now, we're about to become members of the foundation group. I think it's just perhaps the way it was expressed in the report, Jo, that we're not going to be reviewing those with the foundation group. It'll probably be with Glenn as the new chief exec and Russell as the new chair. But I don't think the automatic membership of the foundation group is going to affect the fact that those are our 3 priorities moving forward. We may be nuancing them, but it was just the way it was reported there.
I think that's a helpful elucidation there. Thank you. Yes, so we will. One of the things we're interested in is making sure we have the alignment in terms of some strategic big moves. But we've already done a piece of work as part of the proposition that we put forward. But thank you for raising that.
Any further?
Yeah, a couple of points, and maybe this should be discussed later on. So feel free to do that then. But 3 things. One, there's still text in the document around the final sign-off of the divisions for the plan, which is something I'd like to understand better. The second thing is there's clearly also a role for the system to support our plan. Did we agree any further on how that's going to take place and how we're going to be able to measure that? And the third thing is, clearly the industrial actions have a lot of impact on our plan. And I was wondering, is that on a system level, a regional level, a national level, any form of guidance on how we're going to deal with this? Because it's going to be a major impact.
Should I take those, Chair? Thank you, Richard. Yes, in respect of the first point, the 28 million is a significant challenge. We do have work stream leads. We've identified the senior responsible officers, exec director level that are leading those on a work stream basis. Those are progressing through the hurdles of identifying how we get them down to divisional level. I think the principle is understood, it's well understood, it's been articulated, the divisional leadership would accept that. Actually transacting that down to budget level requires a level of detail that needs to be understood. We're still working through. Some of that has happened, some is still progressing. We discussed one of those this morning in respect of the bank and agency work stream. So I think that is still progressing. I don't think there are huge challenges in that respect to get over that hurdle. It's well understood that it will end up at divisional level, as in the people who own the responsibility for managing those budgets should be able to clearly recognise there's a savings opportunity that we present to them down at that level. If it's clearly articulated in sufficient detail, then it should easily be accepted that that's transactable. It's a defined scheme. In respect of the second point, so within the 28 million of savings opportunities, we did agree 4 million of schemes that we needed the ICB's support on helping us transact across the system, or we needed the leadership across the system to come together. 2 million of that was around savings on sort of non-clinical workforce savings. The other 2 million was around capacity, so the excess capacity that we put across the system to support flow. Both those pieces of work are progressing again with the support of the system. They're both visible to the system leadership as 2 pieces of work that are progressing. We've got, particularly around the non-clinical workforce, we've got HR directors and finance directors looking at a piece of work, particularly looking at the benchmarking reports that we've got across the system, but also a mutual aid framework where we've got challenges across the system around our workforce, around the non-clinical staffing areas. The more challenging aspect is still around the flow and discharge. It's been heard that the risk and incentive framework that I've put together needs to be discussed in more detail with our system partners. But they are still progressing, and there is still that level of expectation, and indeed there is still buy-in at the ICB level around helping support leading that piece of work across the system. In terms of the final aspect, in terms of the impact of industrial action, so I was on a call with National Finance Director yesterday, and it is to be reflected that there will be an impact, both in terms of the volumes of activity, that particularly around the elective activity that organisations potentially having to cancel as a consequence, but also the financial impact, the financial impact of having to pay staff in order to come and work to cover some of the junior doctors. So again, both of that is in train. Those conversations are in train. Don't know the exact impact, but that was the positive message that was given.
Okay, so I sense a level of, comfort on your side in those questions. Just on the first point, I think there needs to be a moment in time where it is all clear and accepted, and this is not just the financial goals, but it's also the operational and the other goals.
On that point, I mean, to what extent are we incentivising divisions to take ownership, if you like, and to achieve those programmes? Are we in any way doing that? What's the benefit to them for doing it?
I mean, as an organisation, we're jointly responsible.
Yeah.
We are leaders of this organisation. The divisions are where the resource is actually committed and spent in that respect. So we set a balanced plan. That balanced plan was signed off in recognition as a £28 million PEP programme. The work streams were approved. We all signed those off. There's recognition that it will come down to divisional level. Is there an incentive from a reward perspective? No. But we were clear as part of our accountability framework that there is an expectation that performance is managed by those who do the work. Back to the forward improvement system, isn't it? So we do absolutely need to ensure that it is owned at divisional level.
I think you make a very good point, Chair, because it's true that in some organisations where a division or a directorate makes a financial saving, they're allowed to keep some of that financial saving to invest in improvement initiatives for the future. We haven't done that partly because the process is sometimes seen as unfair, so it's easier, if you like, for some services and some divisions to make more of a saving or more of a profit than others. So we haven't done that for that reason. However, the efforts that particular teams and services have made to improve the efficiency and productivity and quality of their services are recognised and rewarded, either through face-to-face conversations or Thank You Thursdays, or indeed through our staff awards programme.
Okay, and that's good to know. I suppose my question for reflection is recognising your point about financial incentivisation, but I wonder whether it, as part of the performance review process and accountability framework that we're putting into place, is there a place in there for us, for example, people that do what they need to do get greater leeway or greater flexibility? And I think that's kind of incentivisation, I think might be very helpful, because that would be seen as a carrot, not a stick.
I would agree, Chair, and the new Director of Performance is working up that accountability framework in that way. Absolutely.
Right, any further questions or comments for Joe on the annual plan? No? It's for noting at level 4. I think, let's move on then. Next one, the 5-year joint forward plan. Okay, Joe.
Thank you, Chair. So the paper is laid out for you. You will note from the reading room the whole paper is 80 pages long, so I don't propose to go through the detail at all. You can go here. This is for noting. We have spoken about this before, and also it's been through the Finance and Performance Committee. This is for the formal adoption of the plan that the ICB has submitted to NHS England on the 30th of June, so it has already been submitted. The priorities that are within it are consistent with our 3-year plan. It is outlined and based on the long-term plan and other guidance issued by the NHS and NHSE. It is a mandatory requirement, and it has been developed in consultation, if you like, or alongside the integrated care strategy. Now, just to remind colleagues, integrated care strategy is the place version of the plan that has been supported and developed with colleagues from the Health and Wellbeing Board. So this is our first attempt at providing the NHS view of how we propose to deliver the NHS elements over the next 5 years as we develop our place and system responsibilities. So the details are outlined in the pages. In terms of the recommendation from my perspective, I think it is for us to endorse, but you will note that one of the requirements, if we are to achieve the left shift aspiration, what we mean by that, Health and Wellbeing Board did have a long debate about what do you mean by left shift. This is actually acknowledging unless we help the whole population take responsibility for their health and well-being, and invest in prevention, then the long-term health of that population will not be achieved. From an acute perspective, obviously, that may cause us challenges over time, and I think in terms of the implementation of the plan, requires us both to be mindful of the medium-term financial plan work that is ongoing, both internally here but also across the system, and I think that will then help drive the roadmap by which we get to financial balance. So there is quite a lot of work to be done coming out of delivery of this strategy, but those are covered in the next steps that are identified in the paper. So it's for us to note, to endorse the plan, and then, as I say, just note the further work that will be required if we're to achieve the ambition.
Thank you, Jo.
Let's take questions.
Questions, comments?
So, you know, I completely take the recommendation, but the question is more about the medium-term financial plan and to what extent we are able to really make sure that we synchronize it with our own.
Yes, thanks, Richard. So we're absolutely involved in that, and as you know, we've been working on a financial model for our own 5-year financial strategy. So we've learned that Region NHS England are coming out with some assumptions around what might look like in the next 5 years, some financial assumptions that we can work with. Those will be shared at ICB level, shared at the trust level. Again, we can push that through our own assumptions, our own model. But yeah, we're very closely aligned in that respect, and we'll ensure that it properly reflects what we believe is the reality of what's possible and achievable.
Thank you. Any more questions or comments? No, thank you. That's for noting at level 5. So we note that and move on to safeguarding annual report, which I think is Sarah.
Thank you, Chair. So the Safeguard Annual Report highlights the work undertaken to provide assurance that the Trust is compliant with their statutory responsibilities in relation to children and adult safeguarding. And we offer an assurance level 6 to the board for the annual report. I am taking the paper and the annual report as read, but I do just want to pull out the Care Quality Commission visit, which was published on 6th April 23. And this was the visit to the emergency care, medical care at both Worcester and the Alexandra Hospital sites. And I think given the complexity that we've talked about already, the pressure on services, the pressures on staff, the findings are something to celebrate from a safeguarding perspective. The regulator found that staff understood how to protect patients from abuse, and services work well with other agencies to do so. And this included deprivation of liberty, the legal frameworks around Consent and Mental Capacity Act. However, they did find that mandatory training compliance remained a concern within the Trust, with particular reference to medical and dental staff compliance. But as I say, the amount of work that has gone on over the last 2 or 3 years from what I've seen from coming in with fresh eyes, it's truly remarkable. And I think, a note to colleagues in the safeguarding team and the clinical teams who are working with them day to day. And what we will now continue to do is to build on those very, very strong foundations that are already in place. And just a last note, as part of my induction, I've met with both the adult safeguarding board chairs and the children's safeguarding board chairs, and they both hold the Trust in very high regard for our staff's commitment to safeguarding, and also the level of assurance that is offered coming out of the Trust, which again is certainly something to celebrate and be proud of.
Thank you, Sarah, and that's great. Any questions or comments? No? Lovely, and it's really nice because obviously you're coming into this with a fresh pair of eyes. So I think your level of assurance, personal, I can feel some confidence there, which I think is really gratifying. So thank you very much for that. It's for assurance at level 6. Do I have your agreement? Thank you very much. Let's move on then to the integrated performance report. We could do. What shall we do? Should we
Facilitate attendance and allow us to continue with the industry.
Yes. Do we know how long you need to go out as well? Okay, fine. In which case, I think if we have no one from Oxford.
I think Matthew said he's just going to find out how long people are.
Oh, okay. Okay, let's just pause for a moment. Who's doing the? Oh, Rebecca, you're going to do the intro.
I'll do the interview, yeah.
Let's just pause just for a second to see what's happening.
The other thing we could do is take quality and safety and then work
going
on
to say.
if you would like.
Yeah. Shall we do that? Let's then move on, and if you'd like to do sort of the intro, and then we'll look at the other areas and then
come back to the operating performance.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So this is the integrated performance report for month 2, which is May performance. It's here for assurance, and it's assurance level 4. Just before I hand over for quality and safety, we're obviously going through a little transition in the reporting at the moment to make our reports more consistent with our SWIFT colleagues. So this marks the first report where we're making that transition in part, but we'll be reviewing the format and the length of the report to make sure that over the coming months it becomes more consistent. So look out for those changes, and also any feedback, obviously gratefully received as well. So I'll hand over to, I don't know who wants to go first, Sarah or Christine, on the quality and safety.
Thank you. Again, I'm taking the section as read, but just a couple of things to pull out. The first is complaints. So complaints remain a concern within our surgical division. Additional support has been in place for the last 4 weeks. However, that condition has continued to deteriorate further in months. There are executive conversations now taking place with the divisional triumvirate to explore what additional support can be provided to that team, and also looking at any additional capacity within my team from the corporate team to actually be released to support the team with boots on the ground. The second is infection control. Pleased to say that we're compliant in month with infection targets for E. coli, Klebsiella and Pseudomonas for May 23, and do remain compliant year to date. However, members will have seen that we've reached year to date targets for C. diff and MSSA, and we've reached the year-end target for both infections. However, updates from the regional IPC meeting this week advise that we are seeing increases in incidence of C. difficile and bloodstream infections such as Pseudomonas and E. coli across the region. And we have seen further increases of cases throughout June. The IPC team continue to support wards specifically around keeping their hand hygiene and AMTT practice. And we're also looking at a revised oversight focus on nurse cleaning schedules and also strengthening the management of the PFI service providers in relation to the national standards of cleanliness. We have got concerns in those areas, which we are jointly addressing with Helen as the new coup. And then finally, around friends and family, in relation to friends and family and how we are exploring, reporting on the patient experience and making sure that the patient voice is heard within the organisation and heard at the board, but also that we are involving patients and families in co-production work, certainly around our forward improvement, our service redesigns, and there's so much going on at the moment that we kind of do need to look at a strategy, a patient voice and involvement strategy around how we take that forward in the trust. So that is one of my key priorities over the next few months. And that will also include the patient storyboard process and how we strengthen that moving forwards. But I'll stop there, Chair, and happy to take questions.
Thank you. Yes, Karen.
Thank you. Thanks, Sarah. I wanted to just go back to the complaints point. I was really glad that you highlighted it. So obviously, you'll be aware it's been raised for a significant number of months now. Both the overall position with complaints, but also that it's deemed to mostly sit within the surgery division. So I wanted to get a better understanding as to what we think is behind that, and also the timescales for improvements, because every month we've been advised support has gone in and we should see an improvement, support has gone in and we should see an improvement, and I think you've just said to us support has gone in and yet we haven't seen the improvement. So I'd just like to understand a little bit more about what we think is behind that continuous problem, and both the timescales for improvement and the level of confidence that the execs have that we will actually this time see that improvement.
Thanks, Karen. A very good question. It's something that I've noticed from coming in. And there are myself, Helen and Christine are having conversations with the triumvirate on a number of points, and the complaints and the governance process around complaints is one of those points. What we will do is work with them over the next few weeks to get them to have for a reduction trajectory in the outstanding complaints. But I think what we're going to have to do is to put more dedicated support in to coordinate and navigate what people are doing in that governance team around the process of managing and responding to their complaints. We're going to have to be more hands-on supportive until we clear the backlog.
And any idea of time scale?
Until
We won't hold you to the.
no, until we. I mean, I would absolutely want them to be back on track within 3 months, Karen. You know, and I think that's being generous. However,
I do too.
yeah. But I think the scale and the complexity of what that division are dealing with in the round, we need to take that into consideration.
Okay, Colin, you want to come in?
I have a question about sequins. It was really, at this point in time, are there any, we ought to be concerned about our ability to achieve the targets, and if we aren't going to meet them, what might be the impact of that?
Good intro into Christine. Thank you. In terms of sequins, no, we were very careful in terms of selecting the sequins that we have chosen to be incentivised on, to choose ones that we thought that we could achieve, and in addition, ones that are targeting improvements we already wanted to make in terms of improving quality of care. So I'm not too concerned about sequins. I've got plenty of other concerns, but not in terms of the rest of my section of the quality performance report, you'll see that this month there's more detailed mortality reporting than we've had in previous reports. Our standardised mortality rates, both HSMR and SHMI, are in the as expected range, but we are concerned about an increasing number of deaths in the emergency department. Those patients are patients who were brought into the emergency department already at the end of their life, and usually stayed a long time in the ED before they died, between 12 and sometimes more than 24 hours. And whilst we don't think that mortality reflects poor care, it does reflect a poor experience for patients, and I'm sure all of the board would agree that it's not the way that we would want patients at the end of their life to be managed in a busy emergency department, which really highlights the importance of the work that we're doing to improve patient flow out of the emergency department to inpatient wards, which I'll talk about later on the agenda. We continue to struggle to get patients with fractured neck of femur to theatre in a timely manner. There is some work that we continue to need to do across the pathway. We've had a large increase in trauma admissions on this site over recent months, and actually particularly at the weekend our trauma admissions were very high, which has meant that our trauma bed capacity is not where it should be, and we have met with the surgical division over the last couple of weeks to work out a plan for how we can accommodate those patients. That said, the outcomes for patients with fractured neck of femur in terms of mortality and length of stay is good. Strokes retained its SNAP grading of B, which is a great testament to the hard work of the team, particularly given the challenges we have in getting patients to the stroke unit in a timely manner, given the urgent and emergency care pressures. And I think that's all I wanted to say on my section of the report at the moment, but happy to take questions.
Thank you, Christine. Sarah?
I just really wanted to add just around the end of life patients sadly dying in our EDs. We've talked about again the industrial action, but there are a positive out of the planning and the system work that Matt referred to earlier, and that we are using this opportunity to test some new pathways where, from an admission avoidance and a redirection point of view, is that these patients such as these should not be coming into our ED over the industrial action period because of the new ways of working that have been put in place by both West Midlands Ambulance Service and the Community Health and Care Trust. So I think there is some learning there which may give us the opportunity to fast track some of the improvements that I think people have been wanting to make for a little while. So there are some positives there.
Thank you, Sarah. Julie?
So that's really good. But should these patients be coming to ED at all if they're end-of-life patients? No. And are these temporary measures going to remain permanent afterwards, so we're providing a much better standard of care for people at the end of their life?
So the Health and Care Trust are in the process of setting up a care coordination hub, which all of those referrals for such patients would go through that hub before there's a decision made to transfer into hospital. And that
did we not used to call those single points of access?
We did.
And the renaming something.
I'm not going to jump on because
It will be called that.
Yes. Yeah. We will. At the moment, they're kind of under SRO for developing our single point of access, but we've kind of got a community one being formed now, and then the push is that we have a single system, single point of access to both discharge patients from and also admit into.
Okay, and how is this going to be transmitted across the whole health economy? So if a GP is faced with relatives calling out patient needs stronger pain relief at the end of life, how will they know to access this new system?
So this is being managed at the moment through the ICB comms and the community trust.
Okay, and we're auditing that, are we?
We are, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think I understand your concern, Julie. I know from personal experience of looking after my mum at the end of her life at home, it is very difficult for families when they're faced with a patient who is deteriorating out of hours and at weekends, and the usual services that you would want to contact for help are not always available. So for me, the important thing about improving care for these patients is to work with primary care, with services like hospice at home and home health care, and our community provider, to make sure that those services are available at the end of the phone 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And it's a challenge to do it, but that's what we need to do. We need to make sure that patients who wish to die at home are enabled to die at home in the loving care of their family and the people they care for.
Okay.
Can I ask a question on this? Because I think colleagues will know a few months ago I did a shift with West Midlands Ambulance, and I certainly had the experience of a lady being brought into our ED who had a respect form in place and yet was conveyed. And do we have, I assume this wasn't an isolated incident, so are we comfortable that our respect process is working as it should? Because that seemed to imply to me that it wasn't.
The respect process itself, in terms of working with patients and their families to agree what their wishes are as they reach the end of their life, is good and robust. The difficulty is when the deterioration happens and the family or friends become concerned. There's not always a service there that can help, and those patients do end up being brought in. Locally within the Trust, we have got our Learning from Deaths team working now with the Respect Rollout team and more closely with the Learning from Deaths community across the system to look at those issues in the round. Because it's so important, isn't it, patient experience at the end of life.
And presumably, Sarah, part of that work is going to talk about expanding urgent care response and those kinds of things, which would be the obvious thing to do in a situation like that.
And again, over the industrial action period, that is what the community trust have done, is expanded the number of places that they can offer in that urgent response team.
Right, any more questions or comments on quality and safety? If not, I'm going to go back to operational performance because we moved on as we were not in the room. I don't see any other hands. So going back then to Helen, are there any particular things you'd like to bring to our attention on the operational performance?
Thank you, Anita. I think it's fair to say that we still remain in a challenged position in terms of our elective recovery, our cancer recovery, and also across urgent care. But I think there are some positives within there that we should pull out. But there are also some areas that I would like to just touch on in terms of where we need to do some additional work. So in terms of our position around the 78-week waits from an elective point of view, we're making really, really good progress on that. And the May position, we're forecast around 20 in terms of that outturn. That does look like that would have been better, particularly for June and moving forward into July. However, we have got the impact of junior doctors on there. So without that impact, actually, we're making really good progress along those lines. We have got a number of specialties that I think you've spoken here about that we are quite concerned around, with urology being one of them. And I think urology is the big impact that we're starting to see within cancer as well. However, what we have now just received is a mutual aid offer to support the backlog of urology cancers from a nearby organisation. They're going to take the full backlog. So that is really, really positive in terms of that mutual aid. I think the big thing for us that we need to be concentrating on really is that faster diagnosis standard in terms of actually telling patients whether they've got cancer or not and doing those investigations earlier. And again, one of the challenges we have got there again is in urology, but we have agreed some mutual aid in terms of supporting urology diagnostics. So it will start to kick in, but it will be a little while before we start to see that improvement on there, because that will be over the next couple of months while we arrange those patients to be transferred. So still of concern, making progress along other specialties within cancer, but urology being the one that we are most concerned about. If I move forward then, and I've talked about elective recovery again, we have to be on it all the time, and our plans to rebook all of those patients that we may have cancelled during the or postponed during the strike, and so we're working through those as quickly as possible. However, we have prioritised our clinically urgent those patients that have been a long wait, so they will be then reprioritised if we have cancelled any of those, but we've tried very hard not to. We won't know the full extent of that until we come out of the industrial action. I've spoken about diagnostics, really one of the biggest key areas for us in terms of our elective and cancer recovery. And actually we need to understand where those pinch points are across some of those specialties to make sure that we are creating that capacity moving on, and I think some of that is detailed in the report. I think from an urgent care point of view, we have seen a couple of weeks where we've had some really good performance, particularly around our ambulance handover delays, and then weeks where the performance hasn't been as what we would have expected. I think that demonstrates that our processes aren't quite as robust as they need to be, because we're seeing that variation. So we've got a very detailed plan in terms of that urgent and emergency care recovery piece, particularly across the system, in terms of some of the external support we would need. And as Sarah's detailed earlier on, actually we're using this opportunity really to test some of those things that we may not have been able to in the past, to look at some of that admission prevention, look at our different ways, the different offering across the system where we can redirect patients to rather than admit them, but actually stop them coming to ED in the first place when there are alternatives outside of that. I think there is quite a bit of housekeeping for us to do within the organisation, particularly around how we're identifying when patients are ready to be discharged. And so we're just doing a deep dive in terms of that. We did a mini multi-agency discharge event 2 days prior to the strike to see whether we could improve our discharge rates and really push that forward. I think we need to have that process much more multi-agency, because it's not how I would like it to be. So we'll work through that, but it has identified a number of challenges for us around how we are identifying, saying that patients are ready to go. So the test question is, so if the ambulance came in an hour's time, could that patient go? And actually, lots of them couldn't, so they're not actually ready to go. So there are still delays there that we need to be unpicking, and some of that is referrals, some of it is the usual things around TTOs and those. So we are picking that up with the team, and we are wanting to pull now what the things that we've learned out of the MAID event and some of the detail that we've got out there now into a plan where we can start addressing those. We might need to change the language a little bit in terms of, so what is delaying this patient rather than this patient being ready to go because they're clearly not all ready to go. I've had some external challenges, particularly around patient transport, and one of the services that's used by the ACD have had some real capacity issues over the last few days, and that's meant that some of our patients haven't been able to be discharged in a timely way, which has then led to that similar unable to decompress ED at the time that we want, which is really early in the morning. And we've also trying to hold the line really firmly on not bedding down into the SDEC areas, because that's what gives us flow in the mornings. And when we've been successful in terms of that improved position and the improved ambulance handover delays, we haven't bedded in SDEC. So we know it works, so we're holding the line on it as hard as we can, and that's quite tricky when we've got increased activity at the front door. So I think a mixed bag, but I would expect that you were probably expecting that, but we are making some progress, so it is really good to see. Just take any questions, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Helen. Karen first, then.
Thanks, Helen. Just a quick one. In terms of the MAID events, you mentioned the multi-agency elements was not quite as multi-agency as you'd hoped. Can you say a little bit more about that and what we might do to address that?
Yeah, so I've spoken to our partners. We've had a conversation about this at system level, and so really it's about having our partners and other stakeholders in the organisation walking around the wards, identifying those patients, where those delays are, and actually saying, putting an action against that, saying, I can discharge that patient, I can take that patient. I think how we may have probably done it in the past is that it's internal teams looking at their own wards rather than having that external check and that fresh pair of eyes on them. So we're going to put a year's plan in, because we know there are key points across the year where MAID events are significantly improved flow when we know we're coming up to Christmas, bank holidays, school holidays, those types of things. So we've agreed that we'll work together on that, put the plan in, and then really ramp that programme up to start to increase those numbers of discharges before pinch periods across the year.
Thank you.
Tony.
Thanks. My question's about MRI capacity. It seems to be a bit of a bottleneck for us. For the last few months, we've had a phrase, further mitigations being explored. I just wondered what the realistic prospects are of doing something about that.
Yeah. I think that is a longer term mitigator. We did put some longer term mitigations in there. We are starting to hear from some of the clinical teams and also within radiology around the complexity of the requests that we start doing, which limits some of the capacity. So you can't put as many scans through that you would want to within that slot. So I will have to come back to you on that, because I'm only week 2. I would like to have had a fuller answer for you there, but I will come back to you on that.
Yeah. From a clinical perspective, there are some new MRI scanning techniques, for example, MR angiograms and so on, that we use more frequently than we were. They take both longer on the scanner, and not all of our scanners are suitable for patients requiring those specialist scans. So that's the clinical problem that we're working with at the moment.
Okay. Any more questions or comments?
Sorry, go ahead.
My question's about outpatients. So there's a reference in the papers about an outpatients transformation which has been relaunched, and it references digital and physical capacity, which to me sound as though they could be very long term. So are there any short term improvements that can be made in this area?
I haven't quite got to grips under the outpatient recovery plan as such yet, so I do apologise for that. The digital is really working hard to we can to enable those digital developments around those, because obviously they do allow a better flexibility around that application in a different way. So I will pick that up with Vicky, who's leading that programme as well.
Yeah, I don't know, Matt, if you want to comment on
I
that.
think it's just in terms of that, and I think that certainly in terms of Helen coming in, she's very pacey, so I think it's kind of about resetting it, and it's about injecting increased pace into it, so in terms of our patients, in terms of having an impact, a reset, a relook, and understanding where we can move at real pace. Obviously, Helen is new in, just getting her head around it, but that's sort of the value add that she's already bringing to the role. She's fantastic.
Simon.
Just come on back to the point you made about essentially people who don't need to be in ED. In a different place in our finance committee last month, we did look at the diagram that often appears in these papers, the IPR of people we make an assessment of who perhaps shouldn't come by ambulance, shouldn't have walked in the first place. I think for May, we were looking at about 20% here on this site and 30% at the ALEC. And I'm just wondering how we're getting on with system partners. We're going to come on to this a little bit later on, I think, in the patient flow report. But the Sturgis report itself did talk about an urgent treatment centre. Now, it may not be the case for us to draw more people to our sites, but you know, is there any conversations we're going to have about getting ready for winter pressures when essentially more people are going to be coming who might not need to be there? And it's the bad journey for the patient in the first place, because almost by definition, they're going to have to wait. But if there's something else out there, whether it's related to urgent community response, whether it's a walk-in centre, whether it's an urgent treatment centre somewhere else, are we making progress on that? Because while we're focusing on lots of Sturgis, I want us to focus on all the Sturgis, not just those bits that perhaps system are encouraging us to look at.
Yeah, and we met this morning actually with at system level to discuss the Sturgis and report. Both Sarah and I were on that meeting, and so there is an awful lot of focus, as you know, on the total report. I think the piece for us around whether it's an urgent treatment centre or whether we call it something slightly different, I think is in our gift to be able to do so. And when Sarah mentioned earlier, we were testing some of those alternatives this week, and then around how we might use our primary care colleagues in a different way within that footprint, or actually triaging patients before they even sit down in ED, but for us to stream them to other offers either within the organisations or out of if they do hit our front door. I think the challenge that we always have is that sometimes the more often you say don't come to ED, we know that doesn't always deter people from attending ED. So there's a process that's something we need to be doing about if people do turn up our ED and they don't actually go to the main ED if they don't need to do. So where can they go and be streamed to as an alternative? And I'm used to putting in sort of those types of services around that. We've also talked to system partners this morning, particularly about their urgent community response. We want to ramp up our same day emergency care offers so that we can directly stream into there and those can be booked into. I do think there's also something for us in terms of virtual ward, and I would like to explore that further. So our virtual ward offer probably isn't in a phase where it would need to be. And there's something that we can work with our partners in terms of a virtual health and care model, which allows patients to have care in a different way using technology at different levels of intensity or requirement in terms of acuity before we actually get to an admission or attendance within ED. And then how do we re-engineer that back through looking at different pathways, but the real use of technology, wearables, remote monitoring, etc. So I think we've got a number of things that we can start to do differently, but we are working together as a system to be able to do that and explore those out. I think terminology around the urgent treatment centre might be quite challenging.
Can I just come on the back of that? I think it'd be worth mentioning the budget as well, Helen, in terms of the ICB transferring our budget to us in terms of primary care so we can actually model.
Yeah. So we have been, in one of my first meetings with the ICB, they were very keen for us if we wanted to look at what that non-urgent care UTC offer looked like. Would we like to be provided with funding so that we could shape that ourselves in terms of that really clear offer from a primary care point of view? And we said, I thought that would be a really good idea. We can shape it ourselves. So I've reached out to primary care. So we've got a meeting, I think, next week then to start to potentially look at how we would co-design that and understand what that model then starts to look like.
That sounds very encouraging, because I know when people arrive here, we put them elsewhere on the site, it's fine, but some people clearly don't need to come here. And the more we can do to make sure patients go to the right place, because it's their interests that we're interested in. Clearly, if they come here, it puts pressure on staff, but if they go to the right place in the first place, and I know it's not going to happen overnight, but those conversations sound like they're moving in the right direction.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, my experience in previous roles is that it is a cultural change, and it doesn't make a big impact almost straight away. But what you start to see is then that growing in terms of how then people access urgent care, because there's a real difference between urgent and emergency care, and we need to improve that narrative around that. Is it urgent care that you need to be seen within the next 24 hours? It's not emergency care that you need to be seen right now and you need the ED. So changing that narrative is really important.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good discussion. It sounds like there's lots of good ideas there. Richard.
Yeah, so I think we discussed all the critical areas, so I really appreciate that. I just wanted to make a positive remark as well. Previous months we were quite concerned about the activity levels that we didn't meet as we planned for. We did this month largely, which I think is great to see despite all the pressures.
Thank you, Richard. No, Julie.
I want to come back to something Alan said, and I didn't mean to say it in that way. If I tell you all to don't think of a red balloon, or if you think of a red balloon, don't go into ED. So my question really is, if a patient is at home feeling particularly unwell, is it clear what they're supposed to do in our cafeteria?
Yeah, and I don't think it is.
Okay.
And I think that's where we need to start changing that narrative. And really around what are the other options, what are the other things that services that are available for you to be able to do that, and we need to change that quite quickly, but we need to do that with our partners.
Yeah.
We do have some good alternatives to ED available that are very underutilised, so some of our...
Well, then that means choice, and dare I say, it needs promoted without even mentioning ED.
Yeah.
Feeling sick, dial this number. Feeling sick, go here. You know, whatever.
Yeah. I agree with you. Once you say ED, it's
Yeah.
to go. Yeah.
That Karen, I think we need to-
And just to make the obvious point on that, I assume that will also include raising awareness, and I don't know if education is the right word, around staff, because we do have patients. I've had, family members have this experience quite recently when they've been advised, incorrectly by staff as to which unit, which team to go to. So there's something in that, and I'm just checking in that that's part of the work as well.
Can I just go in there? So that is part of the work. We also have the directory service. So Dave Raven, RDD for urgent and emergency care, is working with system partners around the directory service and also feeding that back into the organisation in terms of that educational piece as well. So that is the work.
Richard.
Yeah, I mean, it's worth reflecting on Julie's point. I think it is. That messaging of, if you say don't come to ED, people remember the phrase ED. In fairness to our system partners, they have been very supportive in pushing messages around alternatives through the industrial action periods, and they've supported us with some paid for advertising as well as some social, and it's a standing item on the place comms agenda. But I think there is also the cultural piece that Helen referred to, because we see the activity numbers, and if you look at the number of patients who may have been treated more appropriately in settings other than ED, the scatter diagram shows very clearly that the largest number of those patients are living in the area where it is most convenient for them to come to ED rather than using the MIU. So I think there is an awareness raising piece of alternatives, but that includes the culture change piece that says just because it's easier for you to get to ED isn't necessarily the right thing to do.
Yeah, a point well made. And I have to say, I was at the MIU in Kidderminster yesterday afternoon, that is absolutely a success story. It's working really, really well. They're getting far fewer people turning up who are in the wrong place. They were busy. Wait times were under an hour and a half to getting out the door again, and lots of happy looking people, given both patients and staff. So it's absolutely a model that works when we get it right, and it's taken a long time to get that cultural piece done in Kidneys, but it's working very successfully.
We have also seen, Chairman, I know the healthcare, just for instance, we've seen extra investment on X-ray in the MIU approach, and having that availability, because it's a public understanding of what's available where and when, and we know that the extended X-ray availability of pouch, for instance, has helped to move more activity to there. The big concern for me is, are we moving people from one place to another with that cost, or are we driving more activity into the system? And that's always a factor that I think we need to take into consideration.
Okay, if there are no further comments, thank you, Helen, Matt, and others for their contribution to that. Let's move on to people and culture.
Thank you, Chair. So 3 areas that we are focused on for improvement are agency reduction, sickness, absence and job planning. So agency reduction continues to be of concern. We saw high levels again this month, in May, driven by 3 bank holidays, but also this continued vacancy rates, use of escalation areas and sickness absence. So we have developed an agency reduction plan that will be considered by TME this month and People and Culture in the 1st of August. The highlight of that is that we need to get traction on the PEP programmes associated with the bank and agency reduction, to Neil's earlier point. And the second element is to increase our recruitment activity. So we've rerun the numbers based on those requirements and our turnover, and we need to double the number of those that we need to recruit to each month to 130. So that's the highlights of that plan, but we'll go into a bit more detail through those meetings this month. Sickness absence, previously we reported that we have benchmarked quite well. That's now changed. Since December with the new benchmark data, we're now performing worse than our peer group. We're not seeing the reduction in sickness absence that I would anticipate now that COVID is becoming mainstreamed. We have done a deep dive, again, those reports are going through the forums this month. We are seeing the same type of sickness absence. It's what we're seeing is we're not managing them as well as we should be in line with our policy. That's the main reason. So we've got a number of proposals and improvements that we need to make with that regard. And the last area is the job planning. We're not seeing the improvements that I would expect to see. Being that we asked for corrective action plans last month, so something that I'm working with Christine and Helen on to review next month.
Thank you, Tina. Any questions for Colin?
There's reference, Tina, in the report about our funded establishment increasing by, I think it's 20 odd.
Yes.
And the finance is investigating the reasons for that. Just put a thought in my mind, is there a gap in our system somewhere that means that what's happening out in the recruitment process itself isn't strongly enough triangulated at the centre to enable that information to be readily at your disposal?
So I think we're much better now, Colin, in understanding having a control on the establishment, so we know exactly where that growth is. The 20 behind it reason is to do with external funding. So they weren't shown in month 1, but they're now shown in month 2. So they're not no difference to our run rate, but it's having an impact on our establishment. That relates to some council posts. It has highlighted that we've got 3 posts that have been added to the establishment without, in my view, the correct authorisation. So I'm escalating that to execs for decision on those. So we have now got the safety nets in place to be able to address these as we go through.
It's not an uncommon problem with this one, Colin. So what often happens is you get a specialist nurse of some description, a cancer specialist nurse, stoma specialist nurse, that start off being funded by a charity or by industry. They become established in post, the service becomes essential, highly valued by patients, and then the charitable funding or the industry funding becomes withdrawn, and you're left with a very difficult choice of whether to absorb those posts into establishment or whether to stop the service, and we've been in that rather difficult position.
Generally, you have to commit to picking up your funding when you take it, so that's,
Yes.
you probably consider the previous decisions, but actually, it is a difficult decision, and that is the way the charities continue and keep it going, so so when you accept the freebie, you've got to think way ahead of what it's going to be in 3 years' time usually.
Absolutely.
Any other?
Yeah, just on the point of job planning, because that's so critical also in a number of other areas. So do you have any expectation of when we're going to see the improvement? Is there some form of a trajectory?
That's what we're working on with the division. I don't know if Christine or Helen want to add anything to it. I think it's to do with the capacity within the clinical directors and others to do it, but we're trying to support them as best as we can through the medical resourcing team to get things on the job planning system. So there are things in traction, but not to the pace that I would like to see.
There's dependencies in a number of areas.
Just another point, Tina, and raised this before, and it's probably appropriate to ask him on Saturdays for Worcestershire Pride. How are we doing on our gender identification, on who we are? You know, the form at the end, we have the 82% female. I know we've been looking to change that in due course.
We are. So we're, the staff network are doing a really piece of work. We've probably got some new policies and confidence in the organisation for people to update their personal records of their sexual orientation, etc. And so the issue was around the data quality, before we can report. I think we'll be in a position in the next couple of months to be able to have a much better idea of our data quality. So if I can bring that back in about 3 months' time, if that's okay.
Thank you.
Right. Just before we were, I mean, I think this conversation about job planning is so central. Again, just thinking about my experience yesterday, in outpatients where they were finding rooms that were never used. It turned out because a service had booked them, job plans changed, they hadn't been updated, and therefore rooms were being left empty because the group organising the outpatients didn't know that actually they weren't. And it's about having those accurate job plans and having them communicated. So it affects everything, and it means potentially that we're not seeing patients as early as we could do because we're not using our resources properly. So yeah, an important area indeed. Thank you for that. Moving then to finances, Neil.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so you'll see at month 2 that we're showing a sizable adverse variance of £3.4 million. As we've just heard in the annual planning paper, we did have some very late negotiation of our plan. In fact, it was probably about 5 minutes before the final plan was actually due to be submitted. We were still in negotiation with the ITV. But where that's left us with is with a plan that ideally we would have reprofiled on the basis of those late agreements. So the 3.4 million adverse variance, had it reflected probably a more appropriate profile, would have been around £2.4 million. That's going to be with us, unfortunately, certainly for the next few months in terms of how it pans out over the year. But clearly, before the end of the financial year, you'll see the benefit coming out in terms of that proving position. So it's not ideal, but I'll highlight that each month just so we're all clear exactly how that's impacting on the position. In terms of the drivers of the adverse variance, there's on the face of it, you'll see the income broadly on plan, but I will come back to that after we discuss the operating expenses. Employee expenses, 2 million, a million of that relates to the profiling of the plan. And the others are probably partially non-recurrent items. So we've got the impact of the industrial action, 0.3 million, and some backdated pay costs, 0.3 million, that we're still investigating some of those in terms of the appropriateness of those. So undelivered PEP, 0.3 million pounds is the other significant component in respect of the pay. terms of the operating expenses, so you'll see there's some sort of pass-through, so we get paid the income associated with those on a non-PBR basis. But a significant driver you'll see is the insourcing of additional activity to support the backlog of the 78 weeks. So ordinarily, I'd largely expect to be overperforming on income on the basis that we're driving additional capacity through the insourcing activity. So that's not coming out, that's not featuring. And I agree, Richard, your point earlier, on the face of it, it does appear as though positive from an activity perspective. We're certainly overperforming on outpatient news, certainly performing positively on day cases, but we are quite significantly under on elective inpatient activity, which is a key financial driver. So the case mix may well be having an impact on our income projection at this point in time. So we do need to get underneath the skin of this. I mean, the suggestion could be, I guess, and we do need to look at this, is that we're not delivering the capacity plan in terms of the core capacity plan before then insourcing. And that's something that we absolutely want to be clear on, ensure that we're using core capacity before insourcing and outsourcing activity. In terms of PEP, for the 2 months to date, so 0.5 million against a plan of 0.9 million. So again, we are under against our PEP, but as we've mentioned earlier, we do have some strong processes in place. There is absolutely still lots more work to do. But given the size of the PEP challenge, I'm more assured than I have been previously, certainly last year, in terms of our processes for tracking through and pushing the PEP as fast as possible. I think there's an important point to pull out there, and it does drive the point I've just made, really, the local costs per weighted activity unit, and I will highlight this on a month-by-month basis. So this is just another mechanism of looking at our costs and what's moving, how things are changing. And you'll see that in terms of the cost per weighted activity, it's 7% higher than planned. So on an average basis, we're higher. What's driving that is the expenditure, 3% of that. But if you look at the other side of it, the activity basis, that's also 3% lower than planned. So again, on a weighted activity basis, the case mix is certainly not producing what we had planned. So it's just something that we will need to keep an eye on, because clearly that will have a significant financial impact if we do continue along that basis. So absolutely something we need to get underneath the skin of, understand. From a capital perspective, again, huge capital programme this year, close to £31 million, significantly overcommitted at this point in the year already because of the brokerage to support the completion of the urgent emergency care build. So we are at this point collecting from each of the workstream leads a risk-based assessment of what very likely need is for 23-24. So that we can go and then have those conversations with region around trying to either phase the overspend on the UEC out over 5 to 10 years, or get some brokerage in this year to help support and ensure that we can do the absolute must-dos this year. From a cash perspective, not really concerned at this stage, but clearly if we continue with the deficit, that will cause us some challenges as we progress through the year. Okay, questions, Jim?
Thank you, Neil. Any questions? Richard?
I mean, you've highlighted some of the issues now correctly. I think if I look at the figures, there's probably two main concerns. One around income, which is based probably on the activity mix, and I was hoping you know a bit more about this now, having known this for a couple of years. And the second one is the back. It's very back-end loaded, and I think the assurance we will be looking for is really, so what are the indicators that show us that we will be over at the back end of the year? And I haven't seen those yet either. So.
Yes, so as we mentioned earlier, and I'm desperate to bring to Finance Committee number 3 is an indication of how much of the 28 million we still have a degree of confidence in, because we have seen some fall by the wayside. We do have some mitigation in place as to how we might compensate some of those. So again, we'll bring that to committee. What we've been trying to get in place is some weekly assurance, weekly oversight. The much larger schemes, particularly keen to get some weekly milestones in place so that we know that things are happening on a week-by-week basis. There has been some pushback, some challenge, absolutely, from colleagues. It's kind of over process, but it is giving us that level of assurance. And in the past, if we've left it a month between progress reports, we found that it's then another month before it's delayed. So there's a balance, I think. I think we'd all agree as execs. Maybe we have or we haven't found that balance yet. We're still working through that challenge. But at this point in time, we're wanting to get certainly those major schemes on weekly. We've got most of the SROs are accepting that for the major schemes. And as I say, I'll bring it back to finance committee in the next couple of weeks, what that picture looks like.
And then also the analysis on the
And the income side.
Yeah, can I ask about our relationship with the ICS on finance? Because I'm aware that they're planning to change their governance arrangements to have a formal finance committee and effectively an expenditure control subcommittee. How much involvement have we as a trust had yet in how that's panning out?
Yeah, so we have got the draft terms of reference for that. We'll bring that to finance committee and circulate out for the finance committee. The initial meeting of that group, I think, was supposed to be a week or two back to get the first cut of a conversation. That was unfortunately cancelled because of leave. But we're absolutely involved in that. It's recognised that this is a collective review of some of the collective spend challenges that we have as a system. So it's the visibility oversight, but if there is new proposals around new investment, that we will look at that as a system as opposed to it's an ICB level decision.
Thank you. Any more questions or points? Right, thank you everyone who contributed to that discussion. Let's move on then. In the interest of time, I'm going to go to committee chairs and just ask if there's anything they did want to highlight or whether they can take their reports as read. Finance and performance, first of all, Richard.
Well, it is all in the report. You have a good to mention the signing of the annual accounts, and maybe you can comment on this too. I think land sales is definitely an issue to be aware of. We talked about the TAP and then forward, in particular, sense of urgency needs to be the documentation.
Thank you for that. Any questions for Richard?
Did you just want me to feedback on the account? So
Yeah.
we are constituting the audit committee at the private board this afternoon to sign off the accounts. So.
Right, thank you. Right, moving on then to Quality Governance Committee, Julie.
We've covered most of the issues we did go through, but there is one issue that we haven't yet, and I'll just ask Sarah to briefly talk about the kitchen issue that we've had following an inspection.
So the board will be aware around the CT outbreak, which I think was around 18 months ago on the zonal kitchen around the Laurels unit. So there's been a lot of work which has gone into sorting out the issues in that space. And unfortunately, we did have an assurance visit from NHSE last month, and a number of issues were still found to be apparent. So we have now entered into more formal conversations through our Director of Estates, working with our PFI contractors around improving the cleanliness and the response to issues. And that work is being supported by myself and Helen. We had a second visit from NHS England last week, which we invited the team in to actually look at how we were, the experience of our patients when boarding additional patients in our ward areas, and also the overcrowding and corridor care in ED. But we also took the opportunity to go and visit the zonal kitchen. And unfortunately, again, there were issues around the flooring, which we had been assured by contractors that the floor had been relayed, and it hadn't. So again, conversations taking place. The floor is now being relayed as we speak. However, this is something that has got mine and Helen's utmost attention, but it does place us at risk around the rating that we have with NHS England for IPC. but this is top of my priority to sort.
Questions or comments?
What sanction do we have on the contractors if they said they'd done something and they didn't do it?
So this is something that myself and Helen are taking, and this was something to discuss later, Simon.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for that, Julie. People and culture. Karen.
Only a couple of quick things to add. I mean, Tina's covered most of it in that we've taken a deep dive on both bank and agency and the next committee. The only thing about the last one to add to that is that we supported the proposal for a trust-wide review of our education provision to ensure that that's as streamlined and effective as it could be, which is very much the model that other organisations are looking at. So it's a timely and welcomed review.
Thank you. No questions or comments on that? Okay, so we'll briefly end the integrated performance report was level 4 for assurance. Are we happy with that? Right, thank you very much. Moving on then to improving patient flow. Christine.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So I will take the paper as read. The reason for bringing this paper is really to explain to the board and to the wider public why we are prioritising patient flow and what actually we mean by that. So improving patient flow means not having patients in our hospital for a minute longer than they need to be, and making sure that all the time they spend within our hospital, in our urgent and emergency care services, is time that is adding value to their care. The reason for focusing on the issue and it being one of our key priorities for the year is partly because it's CQC must do. So following on from our CQC inspection of both of our emergency departments, they noted that whilst the departments were no longer rated as inadequate and were in fact rated as good for caring and responsiveness, the issues that we had with overcrowding in the departments needed to be resolved by improving the flow of patients out of the department to downstream wards. Secondly, we have signed up as a system to delivering the 76% emergency access standard. That means that 76% of patients who attend our emergency departments must be seen, treated, and either admitted, referred, or discharged within 4 hours. And we have agreed as a system that we're going to deliver that. The main challenge to delivering that standard for us in the acute sector is in the admitted patient pathway. So that's a reason to focus on that. And then finally, we had the fourth review of our urgent and emergency care pathways across the system, commissioned by the ICB by an independent consultant called Dr. Ian Sturgis, who's a general physician, retired now, specialising in frailty and acute frailty particularly, who came and made a number of recommendations for us and for our system partners about improving patient flow. The report gives some benchmarked analysis of what we think is causing the challenges that we have. I think it's true that whilst we are quite efficient in some areas and benchmark well, particularly in terms of getting patients discharged from hospital earlier in the day, we've got considerable scope for improvement. We know that our bed base is relatively constrained for our population size and our population weighted admission rate, and that is in the Ian Sturgis report too. That means that we have to be even more efficient in using our beds properly and making sure that patients don't stay any longer than they have to. So the report concludes with the recommendations that we have agreed as a system to improve flow of patients from admission to our hospital through to discharge. A lot of the actions are for us, and it's within our gift to make the improvements we need to make. We are approaching it using the forward improvement system, but actually we are drawing on all the quality improvement tools that are at our disposal, and in particular using a bit of agile methodology in order to do this, because we have got a very short time to be able to deliver these improvements. Our new emergency department opens in just 17 weeks' time. Unless we can improve the flow through our urgent and emergency care pathways before then, we will still be suffering ambulance handover delays and overcrowding in the new department. A great hero and mentor of mine, Clifford Mann, who used to be the president of the Royal College of Emergency Medicine, always said that the way to solve the challenges of an overcrowded emergency department is not to build a bigger emergency department. It's about eliminating exit block from that department, and that's what we're looking to do with this patient flow programme. Happy to take questions.
Colin.
Thanks. I found this a really helpful and clear report, and you've clearly addressed all of the issues that we've been aware of for quite some time. I'm encouraged by the fact that you've codified more in the action plan, but if it was me facing the implementation of that action plan, I'd be thinking to myself, that is a very considerable task. If any of these were easy, we'd have done them. So I'm assuming that there's quite a degree of persuasion, changing of attitudes, amongst other more practical steps that you can take. I guess my question is about assurance that you feel that you've got sufficient support to help you ensure that we get these actions implemented in the appropriate timescale.
I think you make a very good point. So the challenge that is brought to us externally is, so you've tried to do this before and it hasn't worked. So what is going to be different this time? And I think the difference is, I don't think making these type of improvements that demand introducing a lot of standard work. They demand a lot of individuals across the whole of the trust to work slightly differently in a more standardised way and change the way they individually are doing things. I don't think you get that improvement by giving orders. I can send any number of emails out to say, you must write the criteria for discharge in the notes, and it won't happen. It has to be done as a cultural change piece of work and almost as a social movement, which is what myself, working very closely with Helen and the ops team and with Sarah and the senior nursing team and the matrons have got to do. We've got to deliver a cultural change and a social movement to do this. What I'm very encouraged by is that by framing the work using the language and some of the methodology of the forward improvement system and engaging with the people who are working on the front line and doing the work, I'm getting a lot more traction and interest than I have than has been got in the past in programs to improve patient flow that have often been reliant on the effort and enthusiasm of one individual, you know, the red to green nurse or the criteria-led discharge matron, and so on. We can't run a programme of work like this. We've had 2 of our weekly stand-up meetings now. In the first of the stand-up meetings, I had volunteers actually writing their name on some of the post-it notes we've got on the wall, volunteering. I'm a great fan of volunteers rather than conscripts, and that was encouraging. I've got good programme management support with the support of members of Joe's team. We've got the involvement of our system partners as well, and some additional programme management support from the ICB to help us with the programme, and my colleagues across the corporate divisions have very generously lent a lot of time, enthusiasm and effort to this programme. So I'm optimistic, but you're absolutely right, there's a lot to do.
Questions? Karen? Thank you. Thanks, Christine. Again, I'll reiterate, really, really helpful report. I'm absolutely sure that you and others are all over the work that needs to happen around patient flow. And I guess my question is more perhaps one of governance, really, because we had the discussion before, and I know that the, let's call it the Ian Sturgis report, was commissioned by the ICS, I believe I'm right in saying that. So my question is that a formally accepted report? I noted in the paper there was mention that not all of the recommendations or actions were agreed with, and I guess so it's that. And if that's the case, have we challenged any discrepancies? And is there anything that we should know here as a board that isn't being taken forward that we may further down the line be asked about, I guess?
Yeah, so I think the Ian Sturgis report, and it is available to you to read all 200 pages of it with the board report, and it has also been quite widely circulated within the organisation along with this board report to give the context. I think the data that is in the Ian Sturgis report, no one could disagree with. I think and a lot of the commentary that is in the report, again, and the analysis, most of it we absolutely agree with. And in fact, I think some of it might be a non-attributed to me, but there we go. Where I think I would challenge some of the recommendations are where whole-scale changes are recommended without necessarily the evidence to back them up. So, for example, you must start the medical day at 8 a.m. Immediately. Now, the evidence, first of all, the evidence that will make a difference is at the moment not there. Secondly, to change every junior doctor's timetable, particularly with the new junior doctor contract, which means that if they start at 8 a.m. they have to finish at 4, which just shifts the problem to a different point of the day. To change the therapists, to change the time of the nursing handover, which would clash with that. I would challenge that is what we should be focusing on at this time. So, and that is what I alluded to in the report. That's not to say we can't trial it and PDSA it in a particular area with a particular service and see whether it makes a difference, and see if we can introduce some different shift patterns. But those are the sort of things I would challenge in terms of making a large-scale unevidenced change.
Yeah, and that's understandable. I guess for me, it's just the record that those things have been assessed, and we've decided not to go down that line because of this reason and that reason, which is as long as we've got that, I guess is what I was seeking assurance on. Really.
And where those recommendations are visible to the whole world, in fact, is on our patient flow wall. There's the things that we must do before the new ED opens. There's the things that we must do before winter, and there's things that are parked for the moment for consideration at a later stage, and that's where that recommendation sits at the moment. So it's not disappeared, it's on hold.
Okay. Any other questions? Tony?
Yeah, thanks so much, Chair. I just want to explore my understanding of the table on pages 9 and 10 of the report itself, which is about length of stay and beds occupied by people not meeting the criteria. It's the comment at the bottom of the table which says, by comparison to other trusts in the Midlands and nationally, relatively few of our papers are waiting for community beds, care homes and nursing homes. Along the state. I'm trying to understand when we've talked about flow and how we're blocked from at the exit point. And my lay understanding was, well, I'm going to say community beds, care homes and nursing homes, yet we're saying that's not. So could you just explain to me what the issue is that sits behind that? And then perhaps, as a second part of the question, before the table there's a comment about GERB benchmarking and an apparent shortage of beds and how the system is doing that. Perhaps the first bit first, which is why these patients stuck.
Yeah, so that refers actually, and it's the way the document's been formatted when it's been PDF'd, refers to the chart that you now won't be able to read, which is on the next page. Which all the different, that one,
which I found, yes.
Yeah. So all of those different coloured bars, the different segments in the bars define what the patients are waiting for, and this actually it came out in the Ian Sturgis report as well, which is actually there are pathway 1, so patients who are going for care in the community contribute relatively few of our patients who are waiting to be discharged. Equally, we have, by comparison to other systems, very good access to pathway 2 beds. So we have a look, I mean, certainly by comparison to places that I've worked previously, we've got a lot of community beds in Worcestershire. So again, by comparison to other places, pathway 2 works quite well. So it's the comparison piece by comparison to other systems and providers.
Right.
Which then means that contrary to, I think, the belief of some of our clinical teams, our efforts really need to be focused on the pathway 0 patients. So those patients who are being discharged to their own home or the place they call home without additional support, and being able to discharge those patients is entirely within our gift to do. So that's where we need to be focusing on all of our effort. Those patients who are waiting for pathways, they do consume quite a lot of bed days, and there is scope for improvement there. But actually, most of our patients is within our own gift. Okay. Any further questions?
Just for me, one of the paragraphs refers to approximate timeframes. I'm just wondering how the sort of timescales are working here, and yeah, I guess the use of the word approximate, given that we know we've got a date, we get a UEC handed over in September, it's due to open in the first week of October. So would those items be ones that are not mission critical to the UEC, and the other ones are on strict timetables? And then I guess the other related question is, are those being monitored weekly? Do you have a sense of when things might be going off track? You know, if something isn't done by a certain time, that we've got to make provision for something not happening that should have happened.
So in terms of timeframes, the first thing I would say is that when we agreed the UEC recovery plan, which is the same, it's all part of the same plan. There is only going to be one plan. There were actions that were agreed to be done within 1 month, and 3 months, and 6 months. The trouble is that in terms of getting this social movement and the cultural change piece, nobody knows when the month starts and when the month is going to end. And actually, for engaging the clinical staff in making these changes, it is much more powerful if you have a kind of brick wall at the end of it, or something hard to aim at. So we're actually just in the process of aligning the timeframes to by the time the new emergency department opens, and for winter, which we've decided winter starts on the 1st of December, which may or may not be the case. So we have got things that are absolutely mission critical if the new emergency department is going to be a success. in terms of knowing whether we're on or off track, what is sitting behind all of these headlines, so let's take a random one, real-time bed management. There is a whole programme of work with multiple steps in a good old-fashioned Gantt chart with good old-fashioned milestones that sits behind that, so that we will know whether we're hitting milestones and whether we're on track or not. Most of those Gantt charts are not going on the wall because a lot of people are turned off by Gantt charts, but the programme management team will be absolutely making sure that those milestones are hit.
Okay. We've
Yeah. I'm still with Simon's question. I don't think it's entirely answered. A couple of things. You mentioned when you did your introduction 17 weeks until opening, but it's first week of October. It's not 17 weeks. No, it's a lot less. And that's kind of our feeling of discomfort, I guess.
Yeah.
I think it's a really good report. I think the approach is right. But I can't get the assurance that we actually get to the point where we need to get it in time. When we see, let's say, progress over the following week. So I do think it's something to think about. How can we assure ourselves that we're on track to deliver to that milestone, which is the ultimate milestone?
Yeah.
So we will be reporting on, so we've got a suite of metrics that we will be reporting on, all of which we capture already, but in lots of different reports in lots of different places. From a progress report, so to report, if you like, externally or at system level, we report to Home First Committee, and there's a highlight report produced with the metrics once a month to Home First. We will also be reporting up to Finance and Performance Committee as a performance, as part of a performance report.
Okay, thank you. Then the final point is really it's great we focus on our problem first, and I think you clearly explained it. Nevertheless, there are some things in there for the system too. Is that also going through Home First, and how do we get some transparency on that?
Yeah, so there are 3 work streams within Home First. So Home First is currently chaired by the Chief Executive of the Health and Care Trust. And the 3 work streams are the pre-hospital work stream, which the work on alternatives to ED, alternative care pathways, urgent community care response and so on is focused. There's the patient flow work stream, which is described in here. And then there is the complex discharges work stream, so that focuses on the pathway 1 and pathway 2 processes, and also discharge from community hospitals back into people's homes, because we do know that we have often a challenge with length of stay in community hospitals within the system. So all, if you like, all areas will be reporting up through the same Home First Committee system.
Right. I think we need to bring this to an end because we're getting short of time. However, I wish to make a question which I'll leave with you all going forward. I share a lot of the concern that colleagues have expressed about our ability to ensure the pace of those short-term things. I am also concerned and just thinking, I'm particularly conscious, Christine, at the moment with your workload. We've got the industrial action, and we've also you're deputising for Matthew as well. I would like to suggest for consideration. It seems to me that there are so much stuff here. I wonder about splitting it. I wonder about looking at the stuff that is short term, that doesn't require a massive culture change piece, and I wonder whether that should be sitting with Helen and Matt in operations. The stuff to get the UEC ready for that. I think the other stuff, the longer term stuff, the stuff that requires the cultural things, I think may well we continue with the improvement system, because I think clearly the cultural piece is huge for that. But I think that it may be that there is so much here to do that actually saying this team will focus on the short stuff and this stuff on the slightly longer stuff might be a way of spreading the workload a little bit better. Now, it will be for you as the executive team to work out how you want to do that. But I have to say, right now, I look at that and think, my goodness, how on earth are you going to cover it all? And I share the concerns of many of us that say, you know, I don't know how many weeks it is. It probably isn't 17, but it's not many.
17 weeks to winter.
Oh, okay, all right. But it's not many.
17 weeks
Yeah,
to winter.
it's not many. And I share those concerns. And I wonder whether splitting the job up to those bits that fit more naturally into the improvement system and those that we could use a more agile, flexible, at pace approach might be a way of sharing the workload.
Yeah.
Just wondering whether we've got-
I'm sorry if you misunderstood, but that's exactly what's happening.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. So, and so Rachel Holloway, as Director of Capacity, has got a huge tranche of work to do in this, very much supported by Helen and the ops team.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. That's fine. Okay, that's useful to know.
I was going to say, we normally have a period in the next meeting when we reflect on the patient story.
Yeah.
Seeing we don't have a patient story, maybe we can just spend a few minutes in that.
Indeed. Right, thank you. Indeed. Okay, I apologise. We've got to just get to the last few bits and pieces. Safe staffing. Justine. Well, no, not Justine. First of all, Sarah. Anything you wish to bring to our attention?
Thank you, Chair. And I'll take the paper as read and take any questions. Staffing was safe across all areas in May.
Thank you very much. Justine, midwifery.
For midwifery safe staffing, safe across all areas you'll see within the report. I think just one thing to highlight is that we've included support staff within the report this month because we saw quite an increase in turnover and also sickness absence within that group. Happy to report that we've recruited and I met some of the new starters yesterday, so that will look much better in not next month's report, but the report afterwards.
Okay, thank you very much. We have level 5 for adult nursing. We have level 6 for midwifery assurance. We're happy to take that level. Thank you very much. TME terms of reference.
Yes, if we can take those as read, there's been some minor housekeeping updates, and I think they'll be going for a full review. I think
Great, thank you. Level 6.
I was just going to say about Chief Exec MD.
Okay, level 6 for approval. We're happy to approve. This is very much temporary. Thank you very much. Any other business? Nothing was notified. Joe Ringshall from Health Watch. I don't know if you wanted to comment on anything that's transpired this morning.
I think I'd say three things very quickly, if that's the right, Chair. One, we work around the NYU attendances. We're very happy to include that. We've done quite a lot of work around that with my office and attendance there. And I suppose one of the reasons I really wanted to come today was the reassurance around the industrial action. And the first point I'd like to make is keep communications coming, because there is very little going on at national level. And so it's really important, even if you don't mention the ED department or business. And then finally, I'd like to say thank you to Anita for her contribution over the years and how much we welcome her and the trust's openness to us and their transparency. And I wish you well in the future.
Thank you. If there is no other business, I will bring this meeting to a close. We are 3 minutes late, so it's not too bad. Thank you, everyone. This is the end of the meeting in public. We will be meeting in private after break. Thank you very much.